The news just in is that the Court of Appeal sitting in the Abuja division has delivered judgment that has affected the David Mark-led exco of the ADC. The report as presented by Daily Trust says fresh setback for Mark-led ADC as appeal court nullifies Congress's convention. This is our reporters. It says appeal court restrains INEC from recognizing ADC congresses conducted by David Mark's caretaker leadership. I have seen Premium Times also making the same report. I've also seen Vanguard newspaper making the same report. I've also seen Channels Television, AIT, Arise Television. In fact, all the leading media houses in Nigeria, they have carried these very reports. Now, here is a story. In April 2026, the David Mark-led exco invited INEC to monitor the national convention of the party in line with the provisions of the Electoral Act. Don't forget that the Electoral Act says that any important meeting of a political party has to be monitored by INEC. Convention is the most important meeting in the life of a political party, national convention. A date was fixed and the venue was announced in the letter that was sent to INEC and also announced to members of the party. Part of the agenda of that convention was the ratification, that is the approval, of the emergence of David Mark, Ralph Arabeshola, Bolaji and co. as new national leadership of the ADC, following the resignation of those that were hitherto in the affected offices. People resigned and allowed David Mark and co. to come in and occupy the offices. Right? Now, just before the holding of the convention, the Federal High Court, presided over by Honorable Justice Joyce Abdul Malik, granted an injunction stopping the convention from going on. You still remember, it's not long. It's just a few months ago, in April. I think it was few hours to the convention. Okay? Just shortly before the convention, that was when that order was granted by the Federal High Court, restraining David Mark and co. from going ahead with the convention and restraining INEC from giving recognition to the outcome of that exercise. David Mark and others, aggrieved with the decision, appealed against it to the Court of Appeal. They also filed a motion for stay of execution, and then they went ahead and held the convention. The matter continued to conclusion beyond the injunction stage. It went up to conclusion. And at the conclusion of the matter in the judgment, the judge held that evidence before the court established that the tenure of the state executive committees of the ADC remained valid and must be allowed to run its full course without any interference whatsoever. The judge went on to hold that only those elected structures of the party have the authority to organize state congresses, and the court accordingly nullified any process initiated by the David Mark-led leadership of the party. Right? Now, today, the Court of Appeal, after that David Mark them, they went to the Court of Appeal, appealed against the decisions of the trial court. Today, the Court of Appeal, sitting in Abuja, delivered judgments following the appeals. Okay, appeals were filed by David Mark. The Court of Appeal delivered judgments today. Normally, the Court of Appeal is presided over by 3 justices, but 5 justices would preside over a constitutional matter. For instance, the question as to whether somebody is duly elected as president of Nigeria or not is a constitutional matter. That's a kind of matter you have 5 justices of the Court of Appeal presiding over it. Every other matter, 3 justices would normally preside. Out of the 3 that presided over the David Mark appeal, 2 of the justices stated that the Federal High Court, presided over by Honorable Justice Abdul Malik, was right in its decision, and that the convention of the ADC was conducted in disobedience of a subsisting court order. That is the injunction that was granted by Justice Abdul Malik. Court of Appeal says that ADC proceeded to hold the convention in defiance of a subsisting court order. The 2 justices then held that the convention is a nullity and that INEC is hereby restrained from dealing or relating or accepting anything from David Mark and members of his exco. 2 justices that held this view were Honorable Justice Okonobang and Honorable Justice Donato Sokorowo, justices of the Court of Appeal. This is the same report by Vanguard newspaper about the same story. Now, out of the 3 justices, one of them, in fact, the person that presided over the panel, Whenever justices are presiding over a panel, one person usually, serves as, let's say, the chairman of the panel. Okay, one person would always be the one presiding, giving direction, telling lawyer, you talk, you adopt, and so on. There's always someone presiding over the panel, and that is usually the most senior of the three. Today, the most senior of the three was the person that presided over the panel. His name, Honorable Justice Abba Mohammed. He disagreed with the other two. He disagreed with them and held a different, what is usually called a dissenting decision. Okay? In his dissenting judgment, he held that the case that was filed at the Federal High Court, which led to the restraining order, bordered on internal affairs of a political party, and that the trial court was in error to have assumed jurisdiction to entertain the matter. That was the decision held by Honorable Justice Abba Mohammed. By implication, my Lord Honorable Justice Abba Mohammed meant that the ADC, as a political party, has the right to determine its leadership, and that issues of leadership of political parties are internal affairs of the political parties for which courts of law have no jurisdiction to go into, according to the Supreme Court. Right? But his decision is a minority decision. In everyday life, we normally hear of majority carrying the day. In politics, we hear of majority carrying the day. In law, in adjudication of matters, when there are 3 justices or 5 justices sitting over a matter, it is the decision of the majority that carries the day. So the decision of the other 2 that held that Justice Abdul Malik was right and that ADC held its convention in defiance of a lawful court order, that is the decision that the law recognizes as being the decider of the matter. So, as it is now, David Mark and all the candidates that emerged through his exco have been seriously affected by this judgment. That's the truth. This judgment has, by implication, affected all of them, from the national down to the states. That's the truth. If anybody tells you otherwise, ask him again. But the implication is that when the Court of Appeal affirms the decision of the trial court, it means that the decision of the concurrent judgment of the 2 courts have, by implication, affected everybody, all the candidates of the David Mark-led exco of the ADC across the country, from the top to the bottom. But what's the way out? Is it a hopeless situation for David Mark? Can he stop at this point? Yes, he can decide to stop at this point and say, gentlemen, this fight is becoming too much. I don't want to fight again. I fought in the war. David Mark fought in the Civil War of 1967 to 1970. I fought in the war. I rose through the ranks. I became a general. I have served Nigeria. I can just stop at this point. So he has the right to say, I'm stopping at this point. I'm not going to push further. But for the fact of other persons that are following him and looking up to him, perhaps there might be the need not to back down at this point, but to take the next available option. What are the options? The first option is for him to file an appeal immediately at the Supreme Court. This is the Supreme Court of Nigeria. By tomorrow morning, his legal team should file an appeal here. They should be working throughout this night to ensure that an appeal is ready to be filed at the Supreme Court of Nigeria tomorrow. 2, they have to file a motion for stay of execution. You file a motion for stay of execution so as to prevent the execution of the judgment of the Court of Appeal, right? 3, compile, that is assemble, and then transmit record of appeal from the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court. 4, file a motion for accelerated hearing of the appeal in view of the election timetable. The timetable is out. As we speak, the political parties that don't have issues in court, they are already following the timetable one after the other and then preparing for the election. For instance, the ruling party in the country, ADC, I've not heard any decision of I've not heard any court matter against the ADC in any part of the country. So they're already preparing and so on, following the timetable and so on. So in view of the fact that INEC has issued timetable and dates have been fixed for one activity or the other, ADC, if they go to the court, if they go to the Supreme Court on appeal, they have to file a motion for accelerated hearing. So in that motion, they're basically going to ask the Supreme Court to depart from its rules. The rules of the Supreme Court has given number of days, like 60 days, like 30 days for the doing of a thing. When you serve this one has 14 days to respond and so on. Accelerated hearing would now abridge the time and allow parties to file their processes maybe within 7 days, adopt in 1 day, and then in 2 weeks' time, decision is given by the Supreme Court. So when you add 7 to 2, it is 9 plus 1, maximum 10 days. Decision is given so that ADC would know its fate, moving forward. Now, the question can also be asked about what happens to the deadline that INEC has issued. INEC has said it's not going to shift its deadlines for the doing of this and for the doing of that. The answer to this is that a decision of a court of law can extend INEC's deadline at any time. That's the truth. And we're talking about the decision of the Supreme Court here. Supreme Court has the right to tell INEC, hold on, accommodate this person before you proceed. And INEC has no option than to obey that order. Finally, where is the hope of ADC at this point? Where is the hope of the David Mark-led ADC at this point? 2 places. 1, God, the creator of heaven and earth. 2, Supreme Court of Nigeria. So it is these courts now that will determine the fate of ADC is largely in the hand of these courts. Okay? Members of ADC are religious people. Okay? So they believe in God strongly. But the fate of the ADC, talking about the physical, I'm not talking about the spiritual now. The physical, the fate of the ADC hangs here at the Supreme Court of Nigeria. If the Supreme Court agrees with the dissenting judgment of the Court of Appeal that this was an internal affair of a political party, then David Mark is safe. All the persons that emerge through him, they are safe. They don't have a problem. They're going to, be presented for the 2027 election. But if the Supreme Court holds, together with the majority judgment of the Court of Appeal, and also with the trial court, that this is not an internal affair of a political party, right? If the Supreme Court says so, then sadly, that will be the end of the David Mark-led exco of the ADC at this time, right? At this time. Maybe David Mark could try again, but for the purpose of the 2027 election, if the judgment of the Supreme Court goes against him, that will be the end of his leadership and his exco at this time regarding the ADC. The days ahead will certainly be very interesting. We hope that the Supreme Court will have bridge time so that this matter can be heard as quickly as possible, in view of the fact that timetable is already out. Lots of people, they have their faith here in the leadership of David Mark. Many thanks always for watching.